My friends, good day. We know a bit more about Air India, the 787, which crashed 2 days ago in Ahmedabad. So there is some information that supports a theory I put forward yesterday. And then, of course, there are 2 or 3 things, just a little bit, that I was able to find, which I will share with you. So first of all, the media all went with the story about the flaps. That means the media assumes that the flaps were not deployed during the takeoff run. In some alternative theories, is that the pilots made a mistake and retracted the flaps instead of retracting the landing gear. This theory is extremely debatable, and even though as a hypothesis it has its merits, honestly it seems pretty unlikely to me at this point. First of all, people say you can't see the flaps in the takeoff videos, and it's true, you can't see the flaps, but you should know one thing. The 787 is a very modern plane with flaps that are much smaller than those on older Boeings. If you consider older Boeings, you'll see that the flaps look like barn doors. Literally, they're big barn doors that are placed stacked on top of each other, you know, that usually fit into each other. And then there are rails, there are endless motors with big screws that turn, and then they push the flaps outward. So they're not only going to deploy, increasing the surface area of the wing, but also move downward, increasing its curvature. Those, you can see them from very, very far away. Yeah, that's not the case on the 787 because it has flaps a bit like a Cessna 152. It's just the trailing edge of the wing, the rear part of the wing that does that lowers. Look at this. It's the rear part of the wing that does this. You see? You just have this part that lowers, so nothing comes out or anything like that. So the device is quite discreet. By the way, I'm going to show you 2 videos. You'll see some 787S taking off from a distance, and I challenge you to guess whether the flaps are deployed or not. Of course, they are deployed in these videos, but it's not something you can see or notice with the naked eye. So that's the first point. Secondly, if you look, there's a very particular movement of the landing gear on the 787. That is when the plane lands. There are 4 wheels per bogie, so it has 2 main landing gears. We're not talking about the nose gear. There are 2 main landing gears, each with 4 wheels, which are arranged in pairs. A bit like the I don't know if you call it the bogie of a semi-trailer, 4 wheels like that. And actually they are positioned so that the rear wheels, the 2 rear wheels, touch the ground first. So the plane comes in, the 2 rear wheels touch down first, and then the bogie flattens out. Okay, how does it work during takeoff? So during takeoff, it goes like this. You see a 787 speeding up, takes off. The front wheels leave the ground first, then the rear wheels follow, right? That's the bogie, right? Front and rear wheels. What happens when the pilots select the little, they have a little lever there on the dashboard. They set it to retract the landing gear. A hydraulic actuator does that to the bogie. Why? Because if it moves like this to retract, it will never fit into its compartment. It aligns with its compartment, causing a unique movement on the 787 not seen in other planes. That's what it does. The bogie does this like that. It goes horizontal and then it starts to retract. I'll show you that. I'll show you one. I looked a bit on YouTube. I found one, a plane that's taking off. I'm going to zoom in on it, and I'd like to invite you to observe. I'd like to invite you to observe what the landing gear does. And you'll notice that suddenly you see the bogie moving forward. And actually this corresponds to the moment when one of the pilots, the one who is monitoring, the pilot monitoring, well, retracts the landing gear. That's the first thing that happens. On the Air India, if we zoom in on the video, well, we'll see that the landing gear is horizontal. The bogies are in a horizontal position. That means this action took place. That means the guys had begun this movement. And of course, afterwards, they no longer had hydraulics for the landing gear to keep retracting. So what we probably have in this situation, we have our Boeing 787 that's flying. The landing gear is down, the gear lever is in the up position, and probably somewhere there are amber lights indicating that the landing gear is in transit, right? So that's a situation I think that, in my opinion, of course, we'll see with the investigation and everything, rules out the fact that the pilots made a mistake. So a takeoff with the flaps retracted, it's practically impossible on a 787. Like I told you, there's the electronic checklist. There's also the matter of the configuration alarm, which means it's not like, for example, the spanner. Look, the spanner, wasn't it a McDonnell Douglas 80? I believe it was the spanner 5011 that killed about 150 people in Spain. He didn't have the flaps. He tried to take off without the flaps. He never actually left the ground. When you're on a plane, especially a Boeing, even though you hear it on Airbus too, when you're on a Boeing, sometimes when the plane is heavy during takeoff, you sit near the wings. You hear literally the wings catching like that. You hear vibrations at the moment of takeoff when the plane lifts its nose. The wings catch the air at that moment. If the leading edge slats, I'm not talking about the trailing edge flaps at the back, those are less important, but if I take the leading edge slats, if they're not deployed, then a stall will occur at this stage, especially on Boeing. Why? Because Boeings fly faster. They need to fly faster than Airbuses. All things being equal, you compare a 777, for example, and you compare it to an Airbus A380. The Airbus A380 approaches much slower than a Boeing 777 or 787. The Airbus's an A330 ahead of a 787 cause problems for air traffic controllers. Because the Boeings are generally, these big Boeings are classified as category D. They have higher approach speeds than the Airbuses, which are in category C. That means the speed margins compared to stalling are much greater, are much wider. Let's say on Airbus compared to Boeing, that means Boeing. Again, I'm not suggesting that an Airbus can take off and the slats retract. I'm not suggesting that. Probably if it tries, probably it will crash just as well as a Boeing, but what I'm saying is that a Boeing has much less aerodynamic margin by design. There's nothing in what I'm saying that suggests one choice is better than the other. It's simply, I'm saying that aerodynamically, Boeings fly faster. It's a technological choice. There's neither right nor wrong. It's just a choice that differentiates these two types of planes. Well, all this to tell you, as for me, I rule out the story about the slat and the flap. I don't believe it at all, but we'll see when the final report comes out. Now, the video I showed you yesterday, that video where you see some guys talking, the plane moving away and all that, I told you that at the beginning of this one, you can hear a noise, like the sound of propellers. You could just hear a very fast clicking sound. Today, good news, the original high-quality video has been released. That means that now we can see better and, most importantly, hear better. I would like you to hear the sound that this plane makes. When you hear this sound, you realize that it makes the same noise as a small club plane. Literally, we hear a propeller noise, likely the ram air turbine or ram air turbine. On the 787, there's a turbine that's placed toward the rear, a bit near the main rear landing gear. And actually what it does is when there's a loss of electricity or a loss of engine power, in some cases, it will deploy automatically. Manual deployment is possible, but sometimes it deploys automatically due to its alternator and propeller. And with the relative wind, that alternator will supply electricity to the plane. So if it deploys, we can imagine that we're in a situation where both engines have stopped. We've seen the ram air turbine. The last time we talked about it on this channel was when that Pakistani plane, an Airbus A320, crashed. Do you remember when it hit with both engines? Well, it hit both engines because he tried to land without the landing gear. I mentioned it when it was news, but never brought it up again. Maybe I should make a retrospective video. And actually what happened is that you see both engines hit, so in the end they stopped. And at one point you can see the ram air turbine that had deployed. That means to still provide power to the plane by using the force of the relative wind. The ram air turbine produces a distinct noise you can hear on the Air India flight. So basically we're heading, aren't we, toward a situation with two engines shut down, which is pretty consistent with the trajectory we're seeing. And the flaps don't seem to be a factor at this stage. So we also have something else. We have the testimony of the survivor, a survivor who was sitting in seat 11A and miraculously he survived. The media probably got it wrong. They made a bad translation. When they said that he jumped out of the plane, in fact, he didn't jump out of the plane while it was in flight. There was likely an impact and then he jumped to escape the fire. That's probably what he meant. Some media tried to support this by showing what appears to be an object falling from the plane. By saying, look, he probably opened an emergency exit to jump out. It seems unlikely that a passenger would unbuckle their seatbelt. Go open an emergency exit with positive pressurization. You should know that I'm not 100% sure. I don't have everything. I have some documents, but really a lot about the 787. But often commercial airplanes, when they take off, there's a slight overpressure inside. You feel it in your ears. It helps press the doors against their seals. So technically speaking, if someone stands up and tries to open an emergency exit while the plane is in this state, I doubt they could just open it like that. And on top of that, the media shows what they call the fallen door, but they don't show the passenger jumping behind it. So really, it's an extremely far-fetched idea. That object we see jumping, that object, it's most likely. When there's an air accident, sometimes something jumps, bounces violently against the ground, and can go very high. It's the landing gear. Since their tires inflated with nitrogen, they can definitely hit the ground violently. If they don't explode, if they don't burst at that moment and they tear, well, they're going to bounce quite high and fall down. So the landing gear, we see two, we see both of them. One of them got embedded in the building so that one stayed there. And there's another one that seems a little bit out in the open, and that's probably the one that bounced in the footage, which was widely shared, and wrongly so, by the way, by the media. Also the surviving passenger. What does he say? He says, the light went out, it came back, the light went out, he saw a green light, and so on. Okay, this testimony is very interesting. And if we try to corroborate it with what happened, here's a little bit of what we can understand. The plane lines up on the runway to take off, throttles up, starts to accelerate, passes the decision speed V1. And so what happens now is that the pilot takes his hand off the throttles and he has to take off no matter what happens. At that moment, we have an engine failure at a certain point. Why? We'll see. Maybe he hit some birds even if we didn't see any. Maybe there was some bad maintenance. Something happened. He passed right between us. These last few days, there was an alert on one of the engines on that plane. There was an alert that caused some concerns, but it was checked, validated, and everything. But on one of the engines, there was an alert. I absolutely can't tell you any more about it. You won't find it elsewhere. It comes from this channel and me. But there were concerns. One of the engines raised concerns on that very plane. So one of the engines, but since it had been causing concerns for some time, well, it failed, okay? The plane keeps accelerating, it lifts its nose, it takes off from the ground. At the moment when the engine fails, the auxiliary power unit, you should know that the auxiliary power unit of the 787, it has an auto start position. If there is a loss of an engine, it can start by itself. So be careful. At the moment when the engine is lost, the auxiliary power unit will start its auto start cycle. But it can easily take 15 seconds plus a few more seconds before the generators come online and are able to deliver power. But let's say the auxiliary power unit activates at that moment. The light in the cabin. We're trying to corroborate the passenger story. The light in the cabin is normal. If an engine fails, the light won't change. The plane won't make a sudden swerve if an engine fails. Because some people said yes, but I see a slight crab during takeoff, but I don't see it, making a sharp movement, etc. The movement won't be so abrupt on a 787. The reason is that it has the ability to correct the asymmetry caused by an engine failure by itself. So it corrects it in such a nice, smooth way that you won't see anything abrupt. As if a human pilot had corrected it. So it corrects almost all of this from the start, right, of the asymmetry. It will correct it by itself. It's a highly advanced modern plane, so you won't see anything spectacular if an engine fails. So I'll add our plane starts to climb. At that moment, the pilots take over. Obviously, they have a positive rate of climb, so what do? First post-takeoff step, positive climb rate. The landing gear lever clicks, starts retracting the landing gear, the sequence begins. The landing gear, the main bogie makes a clack like this, it moves to the horizontal position, the tilt is cancelled by a small actuator. At that moment, the second engine stops. It stopped, why? I don't know. The same reason as the first one, it swallowed some birds. It was stopped by mistake by a pilot who reacted and just went click. That can happen, you know. Remember the Concorde, that did pretty much, the Concorde had the same trajectory as this plane. Takeoff, no engine during takeoff. It climbs, it tries to move, it can't do it, and it falls, it stalls. During acceleration or takeoff, one engine has already been manually shut down. You see what I mean? So sometimes we can have reactions that are a bit quick, impulsive, and unfortunately they can be misguided. So was it a human who shut it down? Yes, why not? Why not? Whatever the reason, when the second engine stops, the light will come on and several things will happen quickly. The light in the cabin goes out and immediately a light comes on with green aisles and everything. It's the emergency exit light. This one is absolutely a priority, so it will run on the plane's batteries. So what does the passenger see? He sees the light go out immediately and the emergency exits being displayed. Meanwhile, the ram air turbine deploys, it comes out. The co-pilot side of the dashboard goes dark because the ram air turbine only provides a very minimal amount of electrical power. There isn't enough to power everything, especially since the plane isn't going very fast. So you have to make choices. The landing gear won't keep retracting. We agree on that because the ram air turbine, even though it provides electrical power, it can only supply electric pumps, hydraulic pumps. That's the whole purpose of the ram air turbine. It's mainly for the controls. I know that's the case on most planes. Retracting the landing gear in the hydraulic circuit configuration, retracting the landing gear is not a priority. Honestly, I haven't read the manual yet, but I bet the 787 is the same. I can't see a 787 flying slowly on a ram air turbine. I can't really see energy being used to retract the landing gear. I don't think that's possible, but if someone corrects me in the comments, well, that's fine. So, as I was saying, at that moment, the pilots send out a mayday, okay? They say they've lost power, they send out a mayday. The plane starts coming back down to the ground while nose up. It's slowly coming back down to the ground. We're talking about less than 500 feet per minute, right? And so, what's going to happen is that at some point, the auxiliary power unit comes on. That means the auxiliary power unit finishes its ignition cycle, it's auto ignition, and it comes on. At the moment it comes on, the lights come back on in the cabin. So inside the cabin, the lights come back on, fully back on. So there, for the passengers, they see the lights go out, come back on, go out. That's kind of the effect it has. In the cockpit, we have the cockpit dashboard that starts to kind of come back to life. The ground proximity warning system is probably alerting us with don't sink, don't sink. Loss of altitude just after takeoff, loss of height after takeoff. So generally that triggers this kind of alert. So the pilots know that they're diving and descending, right? And at that moment, of course, we're going to reach the impact. We're going to reach the impact with the building that houses the medical students. And then, well, that's the rest of the story. The rest of the story, we know it. this passenger who somehow manages to eject, then he runs to save his life, all that. So there you have it, my friends. It's a huge tragedy, because here we're talking about roughly 280 deaths, more or less, counting those who were on the plane, 242 minus one who survived, so 241 plus. There were about 50 people who died on the ground. But as time goes on, this is a provisional count, because as they clear the rubble and all that, several buildings have burned in this area. So as time goes on, they will establish things with more accuracy. So there you have it, my friends. That's the story of 787. We'll see later when the black boxes have been analyzed. They've been found, by the way. When they've been analyzed, I'll give you more and more details and all that. To finish, I want to thank all the flight crew, air traffic controllers, and professionals worldwide through airlines and countries who follow this channel. And they help me a lot with information, documentation, sharing their analyses, their experiences. And without them, this channel could never have existed. Thank you to them. Thank you. By the way, the calendar, my consulting calendar, you can consult me for personal matters, professional matters, and so on. There are dates, and I'll put the link in the video description and the pinned comment. Thanks for watching this video so far. And we'll be back in the next one.